Breaking down Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. Chapter 1 The Real Source of Suffering. Most people think suffering comes from what happens to them, the breakup, the job loss, the argument, the failure, but the truth and what this chapter really drills into your head is that suffering doesn't come from the event itself. It comes from the thoughts we have about it. That's the first big shift Joseph Nguyen wants you to understand. The mind takes something neutral, gives it meaning, and suddenly we're lost in emotional pain. The mind says, this shouldn't have happened, or I'm not good enough, or they shouldn't treat me like that. But the problem isn't reality. It's the story we build around it. Once you see that difference, you realize how much power you actually have. You can't control everything that happens, but you can control how much attention you give to your thoughts. When you start seeing thoughts as just mental noise, not absolute truth, things start to shift. The book compares it to clouds passing in the sky. The clouds come and go, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, but the sky itself never changes. That sky is your awareness, your real self. Thoughts, emotions, and mental chaos, that's just passing weather. When we believe every thought, we suffer. When we observe thoughts without attaching to them, we find peace. It's simple but not easy. You need awareness, the ability to catch yourself when you start spiraling into mental stories. What really stuck with me is this: suffering is optional. Pain might be real, like heartbreak or loss, but the endless replaying, the overthinking, the judgment, that's what turns pain into suffering. And that's all mental. So, the takeaway from Chapter 1, you can't stop thoughts, but you can stop believing them. Once you realize that, you begin to break the cycle that keeps you trapped. You start to understand that peace doesn't come from fixing life. It comes from no longer fighting your own mind. That's the foundation of the whole book. Understanding that the mind is not who you are. And once you separate yourself from it, you start feeling a kind of freedom most people don't even know exists. Chapter 2. The Nature of Thought. This chapter digs deeper into how our thoughts actually work, and it's eye-opening once you really get it. The author makes it clear that thoughts are just mental energy, constantly flowing through your mind like a stream. They're not facts. They're not reality. They're temporary appearances that come and go, whether you like them or not. The mistake most people make is thinking their thoughts mean something. You feel anxious, and your mind says, something's wrong. You feel lonely, and it tells you, you're not enough. But thoughts are automatic. They're not personal. They rise and fall depending on your mood, stress, memories, or even what you ate that day. Here's the part that hit me the hardest. The problem isn't having thoughts. It's identifying with them. When you believe every thought, your emotions follow. You get pulled into the story and start reacting as if it's all true. But when you just watch thoughts come and go, they lose their power. Think about it. You can't control what thought shows up next. Try sitting in silence and not thinking for 10 seconds. The mind doesn't stop. It just keeps producing random stuff. That's its job. It's not evil or broken. It's just a tool meant to help you survive. But it was never meant to define who you are. Nguyen compares the mind to a radio that's always playing. You don't have to listen to every channel. You can notice the noise and still stay calm, detached. And that's real freedom. Not when your thoughts are perfect, but when they no longer control your peace. Another key point is that your experience of life always comes from the inside out, never the outside in. It's not the situation making you feel bad, it's the meaning you're giving it through thought. That's why two people can face the same problem, but feel completely different about it. Once you understand this, you stop taking thoughts so seriously. You start seeing them like weather again, temporary conditions. And when you stop fighting them, they pass faster. So, Chapter 2 really teaches awareness, the ability to notice what's happening inside your head without getting dragged into it. That's when your inner peace starts showing up naturally, not because life got easier, but because you stopped believing the noise in your mind. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Control. Now, this chapter hits on something most of us struggle with: control. We spend our whole lives trying to control things that are completely outside our reach: the job, the relationship, how people see us, how life unfolds. But Joseph Nguyen flips that idea upside down. He says the more you try to control everything, the more anxious and frustrated you become. Because life doesn't care about your plans, it just happens. What he means isn't that you should give up or be passive. It's about realizing the only real control you have is within yourself: how you respond, what you focus on, and whether or not you believe every thought that comes through your head. Everything else, it's uncertain. And the moment you try to hold on too tightly, you create tension and suffering. He compares it to trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Same thing with control. The tighter you grip, the less peace you have. Real power comes from letting go, from trusting that things can unfold without you needing to manage every detail. The author also makes an interesting point. The need to control comes from fear. We fear losing what we want or not getting what we think we need to be happy, but that fear is born from a misunderstanding. The belief that peace and happiness depend on external circumstances. They don't. They depend on how you see and interpret life. When you stop trying to control everything, something amazing happens. You start experiencing life instead of constantly fighting it. You move from resistance to flow. It's not that problems disappear, but your mind stops turning them into emotional storms. I like how Nguyen simplifies it. He says control is an illusion that keeps you stuck in suffering. Freedom comes when you accept uncertainty as part of life. You can still take action, still chase goals, but from a place of calm confidence, not desperation. That's the takeaway here. Let go of the illusion that you need to control life. You never really could anyway. Focus on mastering your inner world. That's where your real power lives. Once you stop resisting the flow of life, you start to see that peace was never something to get. It's something you uncover by letting go. Chapter 4. The Root of All Negative Emotions. This chapter dives right into what most people spend their lives trying to escape: negative emotions. Nguyen makes it clear. Emotions like anger, jealousy, fear, anxiety, or sadness don't come from the world around us. They come from our thoughts about the world. That's a major shift. It means the cause of our emotional pain isn't out there. It's inside. Every emotion starts as a thought, sometimes one you barely notice. You think, I'm not good enough, and instantly you feel small. You think, they don't respect me, and anger shows up. But the emotion isn't proof that the thought is true. It's just proof that you believed it. That's what makes this chapter so powerful. Nguyen breaks down the cycle of how suffering builds: thought, belief, emotion, reaction. And most people live stuck in that loop because they never pause long enough to question the first step: the thought itself. He explains that negative emotions are not bad. They're signals, little alarms showing us where we're resisting reality. When you feel anxious, it's often because your mind is trying to predict and control the future. When you're angry, it's because something didn't go your way. When you're sad, it's usually tied to attachment or loss. But at the root, it's all resistance. Your mind arguing with what is. Here's where it gets real. Emotions aren't something you need to fix. You don't have to push them away or drown in them. You just need to observe them without judgment. When you allow yourself to feel an emotion fully, without adding thoughts to it, it starts to dissolve naturally. Nguyen uses a great analogy. Emotions are like waves in the ocean. You can't stop them from coming, but if you don't fight them, they pass on their own. But when you panic and thrash around, you only make the wave hit harder. So the key is awareness again. Notice the thought behind the emotion. Don't judge it, just see it for what it is: a temporary mental pattern, not reality. That's the takeaway. Your emotions don't define you, and they don't mean something's wrong with you. They're just the body's way of telling you that your mind is believing a story that isn't true. When you stop believing it, the emotion loses its grip, and that's when peace starts to return. Chapter 5, How to Stop Overthinking. This is the chapter that hits home for most people, overthinking. It's the mental habit that drains your energy, your confidence, and your peace of mind. Joseph Nguyen explains it perfectly. Overthinking isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do because you believe your thoughts are solving something, but they're not. They're just keeping you trapped in your head. He says overthinking happens when the mind tries to control the uncontrollable. You replay conversations, imagine worst-case scenarios, analyze every detail, thinking that if you just think enough, you'll feel better. But it's actually the opposite. The more you think, the more anxious and uncertain you become. Nguyen breaks it down like this. Thinking is useful when it's intentional, when you're planning, learning, or creating. But once thinking starts looping with no direction, it becomes noise. That's overthinking. And you can't stop it with more thinking. You stop it with awareness. Here's what that means. The moment you catch yourself spinning, just notice it. Don't fight it. Don't judge it. Don't try to figure it out. Just see the thoughts for what they are. Words, images, stories. Once you become the observer instead of the participant, the thoughts start to slow down naturally. I like the example he gives. Imagine clouds drifting across the sky. You don't chase them or push them away. You just watch. That's what awareness feels like. You can let thoughts come and go without giving them energy. The moment you realize you don't have to engage with every thought, you're free. The author also reminds us that peace of mind isn't something you earn, it's your default state. The only thing covering it up is thinking. When you quiet the mental noise, peace shows up automatically because it was there the whole time. Here's what stood out for me personally. Overthinking isn't a problem you need to fix. It's a habit that fades when you stop feeding it. You don't overcome it by solving every thought. You overcome it by realizing you don't need to. So, the takeaway is simple but powerful. Awareness dissolves overthinking. Don't try to think your way out of your thoughts. Just step back and let them pass. The less attention you give them, the faster they lose their grip. And that's when real mental clarity starts to show up. Chapter 6, The Power of Presence. This chapter is about something most people hear all the time, but rarely live, being present. It's easy to say live in the moment, but hard to actually do it when your mind is always dragging you into the past or the future. Nguyen explains that presence is not something you create. It's what's left when you stop being lost in thought. He says the mind loves time. It constantly replays the past, analyzing what went wrong, or it jumps into the future, worrying about what could go wrong. And that's where most suffering lives. Not in what's happening right now, but in what your mind is saying about it. The present moment, on the other hand, is always peaceful. Think about it. When you're completely focused on what's happening right now, there's no anxiety, no fear, no regret. You're just here, aware, alive. The problem is, the mind doesn't like that stillness. It feeds on thinking, so it keeps pulling you away from the now. Nguyen says that presence is your natural state. You were born in it. That calm, alert awareness you sometimes feel when you watch a sunset, listen to music, or lose yourself in something you love. That's presence. It's not something special or mystical. It's just you, without the noise. The author makes a powerful point. The only real life you have is the present moment. The past is memory. The future is imagination. Both exist only as thoughts. But the present? That's reality. The more time you spend here, the more peace you feel. Practicing presence doesn't mean you never think about the past or plan the future. It means you don't live there. You use thought as a tool, not as your home. When your attention drifts, you simply bring it back. To your breath, to your senses, to whatever's happening right now. What I really like about this chapter is how simple it makes everything. Presence isn't some deep spiritual idea. It's the most natural thing in the world. It's how you escape the prison of constant thinking and return to what's real. So the message is this: you don't find peace by fixing your thoughts. You find it by coming back to the moment where peace already lives. The more time you spend here, the less the mind can control you. That's the power of presence, freedom from the noise in your head. And Chapter 7, Understanding the Ego. This chapter gets into the ego, and honestly, it's one of the most important parts of the whole book. Nguyen explains that the ego isn't who you really are. It's just a mental identity your mind created. It's the false self, built out of thoughts, stories, and labels. The ego says, I am my job, my looks, my money, my reputation, my success. But that's all temporary. The ego constantly needs validation because it's built on insecurity. It lives off comparison. It needs to feel better than others, or at least not worse. That's why it gets triggered so easily. The moment someone criticizes you, ignores you, or outshines you, the ego feels threatened. Nguyen explains that the ego's main goal is to survive, not to make you happy. It does that by keeping you identified with thoughts, always chasing, protecting, defending. It tells you stories like, I need to prove myself, or I'm not enough until I have this. But the problem is, the ego's hunger never ends. You feed it once, and it wants more. What hit me personally is how subtle the ego can be. It's not just arrogance or pride. Sometimes it hides under insecurity, victimhood, or even fake humility. It's any time you're lost in the thought of me. Nguyen reminds us that ego isn't evil. It's just unconscious. Everyone has it. The trick is to see it, not fight it. When you start noticing it, you begin to step outside of it. That moment of awareness, when you realize, oh, that's my ego reacting, that's where freedom begins. He also says ego thrives on separation. It makes you feel like you're this isolated self apart from everyone else. But in truth, that's an illusion. Underneath all the labels and identities, there's something deeper. Consciousness, awareness, the part of you that's just here silently watching. That's who you really are. So the takeaway here is huge. Your ego is not the enemy, but it's not your true identity either. You don't need to destroy it. You just need to stop believing everything it says. Once you start seeing the ego for what it is, just another collection of thoughts, you stop being controlled by it. And that's when you start experiencing real peace, because you're no longer defending an illusion. You're just being simple, present, and real. Chapter 8, Letting Go of the Past. This chapter is about one of the hardest things people deal with. Letting go of the past. Whether it's regret, guilt, heartbreak, or resentment, most people are stuck replaying old stories in their heads, believing that somehow thinking about them will bring closure. But Nguyen says the truth is simple. The past doesn't hurt you. Your thoughts about the past do. He explains that the mind keeps bringing up the past because it's addicted to meaning. It wants to analyze, blame, and justify. It wants to say, if that hadn't happened, I'd be happier now. But that's just another illusion. The past exists only as memory, a thought in your mind right now. When you stop thinking about it, it stops existing for you. Nguyen reminds us that holding onto the past is like carrying a heavy backpack you don't need anymore. You think it defines you, but really it just slows you down. Forgiveness, in his view, isn't about saying what happened was okay. It's about freeing yourself from being tied to it. He also points out that guilt and regret come from the illusion that you could have done things differently with the awareness you have now. But you couldn't. Back then, you acted with the understanding and consciousness you had at that time. So punishing yourself now doesn't fix anything. It just keeps the wound alive. The author says healing doesn't come from reanalyzing the story. It comes from stepping out of it. Every time your mind drags you into an old memory, that's your cue to return to the present moment, to what's actually happening right now. One line really stood out to me. The past has no power over you unless you keep thinking about it. That hits hard because it's true. The moment you stop replaying it, the emotion tied to it fades. So letting go isn't something you do, it's something that happens when you stop holding on. You don't have to fix the past, rewrite it, or understand it perfectly. You just need to see that it's over. The only thing keeping it alive is thought. The takeaway? Peace starts the moment you stop arguing with what's already happened. You can't change your past, but you can stop letting it define your present. That's real freedom. When the past finally stops being your prison and becomes just another story that no longer controls you. Chapter 9. Freedom from Fear. This chapter digs deep into fear. Not the kind that keeps you from walking into traffic, but the mental kind that quietly runs your life. Nguyen explains that most of our fears aren't about actual danger. They're about imagined scenarios that only exist in the mind. Fear of failure, rejection, judgment, loss, all of it starts with thought. He says fear comes from believing a thought about the future. It's the mind saying, "What if this goes wrong?" or "I won't be able to handle it." But the future doesn't exist. It's a mental projection. When you're afraid, you're not reacting to life itself. You're reacting to an idea your mind created. That's why the body can't tell the difference between real danger and imagined danger. The same stress response kicks in. Your heart races, your chest tightens, and you feel that wave of panic, all from something that isn't even happening right now. Nguyen points out something powerful. Fear disappears in pure presence. The moment you bring your attention fully to now, fear can't survive. Because fear lives in time, in thoughts about what might happen. When you stop feeding it with mental energy, it fades naturally. He also explains that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to feel it and move forward anyway. Fear loses power when you face it without resistance. The moment you stop running from it, it starts to dissolve. One thing I liked about this chapter is how Nguyen separates instinctive fear from psychological fear. Instinctive fear is useful. It's what keeps you alive in real danger. But psychological fear is self-created. It's the mind protecting an identity that doesn't even exist. The ego fears failure, embarrassment, loss of control. But your true self, the awareness behind those thoughts, can't be harmed. What stuck with me most is that fear is a teacher. Every time fear shows up, it's showing you where you're still attached, where you still believe a false story about yourself or life. So the takeaway here, don't fight fear and don't obey it either. Just see it clearly. Feel it, let it pass, and move anyway. Real freedom isn't being fearless. It's realizing that fear is just a thought, not a prophecy. And once you see that, fear stops running your life. You do. And chapter 10, detaching from the need for validation. This chapter hits a nerve for a lot of people. The constant need for validation. Nguyen explains that one of the biggest sources of mental suffering comes from caring too much about how others see you. We spend so much time trying to be liked, approved of, or admired that we forget to actually live. He says the need for validation comes from the ego, the false self that depends on outside approval to feel worthy. When someone praises you, you feel high. When they criticize or ignore you, you feel low. It's an emotional roller coaster controlled by everyone except you. The truth is, no amount of validation will ever be enough. Because the ego's hunger is endless. The moment you get it, you start chasing more. It's like trying to fill a bucket with no bottom. That's why people constantly post for attention, compare themselves, or shapeshift to please others. They've forgotten their worth doesn't depend on opinion. Nguyen explains that real confidence doesn't come from proving yourself. It comes from knowing yourself. When you realize your value isn't determined by likes, compliments, or recognition, you stop playing the game entirely. You don't need to convince anyone. You just show up as you are. He also makes a strong point. Most people are too busy worrying about how they look to be focused on judging you. We live in our own heads so much that we imagine others are paying more attention than they really are. The moment you stop needing validation, you free yourself from a prison you didn't even realize you were in. What I liked here is that Nguyen doesn't tell you to stop caring cold turkey. He tells you to notice the moments you seek approval. Notice the tension in your body, the way you adjust what you say or do to please others. That awareness alone weakens the habit. So the key takeaway: validation feels good, but it's not peace. You don't need to prove your worth, you just need to remember it. When you stop chasing approval, your actions start coming from authenticity instead of fear. And ironically, that's when people respect you more, because they can feel your self-trust. Real confidence isn't about being admired. It's about being free from the need to be admired. When you reach that point, you stop performing for the world and start actually living in it. Chapter 11, The Trap of Expectations. This chapter hits on something that quietly ruins most people's happiness: expectations. Nguyen says that almost all disappointment and frustration come from expecting life, people, or even yourself to be different from what they are. Expectations are mental stories about how reality should be. And when life doesn't match the story, suffering begins. Think about it. You expect someone to treat you a certain way, and they don't. You expect a plan to go smoothly, and it falls apart. Instantly, the mind reacts, "This shouldn't be happening." That sentence, more than anything else, creates pain. Because in that moment, you're arguing with reality. Nguyen makes it clear: reality always wins. It doesn't care about your expectations. The more you fight what is, the worse you feel. That's why the most peaceful people aren't the ones who control life. They're the ones who stop resisting it. He also explains that expectations are often tied to ego and fear. The ego expects certain outcomes because it believes happiness depends on them: success, approval, recognition, comfort. But when you expect less and accept more, something powerful happens. You become unshakable. You still take action, but you're no longer attached to how things must turn out. Here's what hit me personally. Lowering expectations isn't about being pessimistic. It's about being realistic. It's understanding that life isn't supposed to cater to your preferences. Things go wrong, people change, plans fall through, and that's okay. When you stop expecting everything to be perfect, you can finally appreciate what is going right. Nguyen suggests that instead of expectations, you should practice intentions. Intentions come from peace. They're about showing up fully, giving your best, and letting life handle the rest. Expectations come from control. They're about demanding certain results to feel okay. That's the difference between peace and stress. He sums it up beautifully: expect nothing, appreciate everything. When you live from that mindset, you stop being constantly disappointed. Gratitude replaces frustration. You see reality as it is, not as your mind wishes it to be. So the main takeaway? Drop the story of how things should go. Let life unfold without resistance. The less you expect, the freer you become. And ironically, when you stop clinging to outcomes, life tends to surprise you in the best ways. Because you're finally open to what's actually happening instead of trapped in how you thought it should be. And Chapter 12, The Illusion of Control. This chapter hits deep because it's about something we all deal with: trying to control everything. People, outcomes, situations, timing. It's like we constantly want life to match the picture we have in our heads. Joseph Nguyen explains that this urge for control is one of the biggest sources of stress, frustration, and unhappiness. The more we try to control, the more life pushes back. And ironically, the moment we stop fighting for control, we start finding peace. The author breaks down how the human mind is wired to seek certainty. We feel safer when we think we know what's going to happen. But that's an illusion. Life isn't meant to be predictable. Everything is constantly changing. People evolve. Circumstances shift, and what's right today might not be tomorrow. When we cling to control, we're basically trying to freeze something that's supposed to flow. That resistance creates anxiety because we're mentally living in the future, trying to shape what hasn't even happened yet. I found this chapter powerful because it's not about giving up, it's about letting go. There's a difference. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring or doing your best. It means you stop attaching yourself to how you think things should turn out. You stop forcing and start allowing. When we loosen our grip, we actually become more aligned with what's real. And ironically, life starts flowing in our favor. Nguyen uses a great example. Think of trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. But if you keep your hand open, you can actually hold more. That's how life works. When we trust the process, things naturally fall into place, and sometimes even better than we planned. My biggest takeaway from this chapter is that control is rooted in fear. Fear of loss, failure, or uncertainty. But once you realize you can handle whatever comes, that fear loses power. Life becomes lighter. You stop micromanaging every detail and start focusing on what's actually in your hands, your effort, your energy, your response. Everything else, you let it be. This mindset doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. Because true strength isn't about controlling outcomes. It's about staying centered no matter what the outcome is. When you reach that point, life doesn't have to go your way for you to be at peace. You are peace, regardless. Chapter 13, Freedom from the Prison of the Mind. This chapter dives into something that honestly feels like the core of the entire book. Freeing yourself from the mental prison you didn't even realize you were trapped in. Joseph Nguyen explains that most people live inside their own thoughts like inmates, believing everything the mind says, letting it dictate how they feel and what they do. The problem isn't that the mind talks, it's that we identify with it. We think we are the voice in our head. But the truth is, we're the awareness behind it. Nguyen says it clearly. Your mind is an amazing tool, but it's not meant to be your master. When we let it run on autopilot, it constantly creates problems. Replays the past, imagines worst-case scenarios, and fills our days with unnecessary noise. The more we feed it, the more trapped we become. But once you recognize that your thoughts aren't facts, something shifts. You start seeing your mind from a distance instead of being consumed by it. What hit me hard is how subtle this prison really is. You don't even notice it because it feels normal. Worrying, judging, analyzing everything. It becomes your identity. But Nguyen challenges you to step back and see how much of that thinking is repetitive, pointless, and fueled by fear. When you start observing it, you break the spell. You begin realizing you've been living in a mental loop built by old beliefs, conditioning, and stories that aren't even true anymore. He talks about how freedom doesn't come from changing your thoughts, but from changing your relationship to them. You stop taking them so seriously. Instead of believing every thought, you just notice it, like watching clouds pass by. When you do that, the mind loses its grip. You feel lighter, calmer, and more grounded in the present moment, where peace actually lives. For me, this chapter was like being handed the keys to the cell door. The idea that I'm not my thoughts, that I'm the one witnessing them, completely changes the game. It gives you space to breathe, to choose. You realize that you've been free all along. You just forgot. Nguyen's message here is simple but deep. When you stop being trapped in your mind, you start living instead of thinking about living. That's real freedom. Not needing everything to be perfect, but being unshakably at ease right where you are. Chapter 14, The Power of Surrender. This chapter is all about one of the hardest yet most freeing things you can ever do, surrender. Not in the sense of giving up, but in letting go of resistance to what is. Joseph Nguyen explains that most of our suffering comes from constantly fighting reality. We want things, people, or outcomes to be different than they are, and that battle creates tension inside us. Surrender is the opposite. It's choosing peace over control, trust over fear, and acceptance over resistance. Nguyen points out that surrender doesn't mean you stop taking action. It means you stop fighting what's already happening. You can still have goals, dreams, and plans, But instead of forcing life to move your way, you flow with it. You let life unfold naturally. And when things don't go according to plan, you trust that maybe there's a better plan you just can't see yet. The author compares surrender to being in a river. Most of us are swimming upstream, exhausted, trying to get somewhere we think we should be. But when we surrender, we stop fighting the current and start flowing with it. Life suddenly feels lighter, smoother, and more aligned. That's because the universe, or whatever you want to call it, tends to work for you once you stop getting in its way. What stood out to me here is how surrender isn't weakness, it's power. It takes strength to accept something you can't change. It takes awareness to recognize that your resistance doesn't fix anything, just drains you. Nguyen reminds us that surrender is an act of trust, not defeat. It's saying, I may not understand this right now, but I trust it's leading me somewhere I'm meant to be. From my own perspective, this chapter hits like a reality check. You start realizing how often you stress over things that are already happening. Replaying the past, fearing the future, or trying to fix what's outside your control. But the truth is, peace doesn't come when life finally aligns perfectly. It comes the moment you stop fighting it. Nguyen puts it beautifully. When you surrender, you create space for clarity and new possibilities to show up. You stop reacting and start responding from a calmer, wiser place. And that's where real growth happens. Not through control, but through trust. To me, the message of this chapter is clear. Surrender isn't losing. It's choosing peace over chaos. It's the quiet strength of knowing you don't have to force what's already meant for you. Chapter 15. Inner peace is your natural state. And this chapter feels like the calm after the storm. It's where everything in the book starts coming together. Joseph Nguyen explains that inner peace isn't something you gain or find. It's something you return to. It's already within you. The problem is that most of us have layered it with noise, thoughts, worries, expectations, and attachments, until we forget what peace even feels like. Nguyen says something powerful here. You don't have to create peace. You just have to stop disturbing it. Think about that. Every time you argue with reality, overthink the past, or stress about the future, you're creating internal noise that covers up your natural calm. But underneath all that, peace is constant. It's not fragile. It's just hidden beneath the chaos of the mind. He breaks it down with a simple truth. The mind is never satisfied. It's always chasing something, more success, more validation, more certainty. But peace doesn't live in more. It lives in the now. The reason most people never feel fulfilled is because they're looking for peace through circumstances instead of through awareness. They think, I'll be happy when, but that when never ends. Nguyen reminds us that peace comes from acceptance, not achievement. When you stop fighting yourself, when you allow life to be exactly what it is, even if it's imperfect, peace naturally rises to the surface. It's not something external that you need to earn or deserve. It's your baseline, your default mode before the mind gets involved. My takeaway from this chapter is that inner peace isn't about escaping the world. It's about staying centered in the middle of it. It's being able to feel grounded even when things around you aren't perfect. When you realize peace isn't something to reach for, but something to remember, you start seeing how much energy you've been wasting trying to fix what doesn't need fixing. Nguyen also mentions that true peace doesn't mean you stop feeling emotions. It means you stop being controlled by them. You can experience anger, sadness, or fear and still remain calm inside because you know those feelings pass. They're temporary waves, not the ocean itself. So for me, chapter 15 is like a reminder to stop chasing peace and start uncovering it. It's always been there, underneath the noise, beneath the stories, waiting for you to get quiet enough to feel it again. Chapter 16, Living with an Open Heart. This chapter is all about reconnecting with the most powerful part of ourselves, the heart. Joseph Nguyen explains that while the mind is useful for analyzing and solving problems, the heart is where true wisdom, peace and connection live. The problem is, most of us have learned to live with closed hearts, guarded, defensive, and cautious. Because at some point, we got hurt. And instead of healing, we built walls. Nguyen says that living with an open heart doesn't mean being naive or weak. It means staying open even when life gives you reasons to shut down. It's the ability to love without fear, to care without expecting anything back, and to let people in without needing guarantees. The author emphasizes that real strength comes from vulnerability, from allowing yourself to feel fully even when it's uncomfortable. He explains that the heart naturally wants to give. It wants to love, to connect, to create. But the mind often interferes, trying to protect us from pain. That's why we become guarded, not because we don't want to love, but because we're afraid of losing, of being rejected, or of not being enough. The irony is, that very fear is what blocks us from experiencing the joy and depth we crave. One line that really hit me is when Yen says that pain doesn't close your heart. Resistance to pain does. When you feel hurt and resist it, you trap it inside. But when you let it move through you, when you feel it fully, it passes and your heart remains open. That's how emotional healing works. You don't suppress what hurts. You allow it, understand it, and let it go. My takeaway from this chapter is that an open heart is the key to freedom. When you stop living defensively, life becomes richer. You start seeing beauty in simple things. You connect deeper with people, and you experience emotions more vividly, both the joy and the pain. But that's what makes life real. Nguyen reminds us that keeping your heart open isn't a one-time decision. It's a daily practice. Every time something challenges you, a breakup, rejection, loss, you have a choice to close off or stay open. The more you choose openness, the stronger your heart becomes. Not hard, but resilient. For me, chapter 16 is about courage. The courage to feel, to love, and to live fully even when life hurts. Because a closed heart might protect you from pain, but it also blocks you from everything beautiful. An open heart, on the other hand, lets life flow through you, and that's where true peace and connection live. Chapter 17, The Awakening of Consciousness. And the final chapter brings everything full circle. It's about awakening, not in some mystical or religious way, but as a deep realization of who you truly are. Joseph Nguyen explains that awakening means finally seeing that you are not your thoughts, emotions, or even your past. You're the awareness behind all of it. It's the moment when you stop identifying with your mind and start living from a higher state of consciousness. Nguyen says that most people go through life asleep, constantly reacting, chasing happiness, and running from pain, without realizing that peace was never outside of them. Awakening is like finally waking up from that dream. You start to see how much of your suffering was self-created by believing every thought and taking life too personally. Once you recognize that the mind is just a tool, not your identity, everything changes. He explains that awakening isn't about reaching some spiritual endpoint. It's not about being perfect or happy all the time. It's about awareness, about seeing things clearly, without judgment. When you live consciously, you stop being ruled by ego, fear, and conditioning. You become more present, more grounded, and more connected to life itself. What really stands out here is that Nguyen doesn't make awakening sound distant or unreachable. He says it's simple, not easy, but simple. It begins the moment you observe your thoughts instead of reacting to them. It deepens when you accept life as it is instead of resisting it. And it expands when you live with compassion, gratitude, and openness. From my own perspective, this chapter felt like a mirror, reminding me that we've been searching for something that's always been within us. Awakening isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been underneath the noise, the fear, and the labels. It's that quiet awareness that watches everything yet stays untouched. That's your true self. Nguyen closes with a message that's both grounding and freeing. Once you wake up, life doesn't suddenly become perfect, but your relationship with it does. You stop fighting, stop chasing, and start flowing. You live with more ease, more presence, more love. For me, this final chapter is the perfect ending. A reminder that the goal isn't to control or fix life, but to wake up to it. To be fully alive, fully aware, and fully at peace no matter what's happening around you. Because once you realize you are consciousness itself, limitless, calm, and unshakable, that's when real freedom begins. This book is all about freeing yourself from your own mind. Joseph Nguyen breaks down how most of our suffering comes from believing every thought we have, especially the negative, fearful, and judgmental ones. He teaches that thoughts aren't facts, they're just mental noise. Once you stop identifying with them, peace naturally returns. Nguyen guides you through understanding emotions, letting go of control, and learning to surrender to what is instead of fighting reality. He explains that inner peace isn't something you gain. It's your natural state once the mind quiets down. The book also dives into awareness, acceptance, and living from the heart instead of fear. It's about shifting from reacting to observing, from chasing happiness to being it. By the end, you realize the real goal isn't to change your thoughts or fix life. It's to wake up from the illusion that you are your thoughts. True freedom comes when you stop believing everything your mind says and start living from calm, conscious awareness. Thank you for listening.